Hey everyone, my name is Daniel, and today I'm bringing you a story that's been weighing heavily on my mind. A story not of fairy tales or happily ever afters, but of quiet heartbreak and the kind of truth that sits like stone in your chest. This one comes from a man named Nathan, 32, and it's about the unraveling of a marriage he thought was steady, maybe even safe. He and his wife Marissa, who is 30, had been together for 7 years, 5 dating, 2 married. They lived just outside of Missoula, Montana, surrounded by pine trees and silence, the kind of place you move to when you want to breathe deeper. 2 weeks ago, Marissa's younger sister got married, and naturally, Marissa was part of the bridal party. For the 2 weeks leading up to the wedding, she'd been completely immersed, helping plan, coordinating decorations, handling every little emergency that came up. Nathan was supportive, even though it meant he barely saw her. She'd taken time off from work that Wednesday through Friday and stayed over at her parents' home to help her sister. He understood. At least, he thought he did. Saturday morning, Nathan drove over a few hours before the ceremony, just to catch a moment with her. He hadn't seen her since Tuesday, and thought maybe, just maybe, she'd be happy for a quick embrace, a familiar face before the chaos of the day. But when he arrived outside her parents' house, it wasn't her who greeted him. It was her brother, who told him she'd meet him out by his car. Odd, he thought, but he waited. When Marissa came out, she smiled softly and slid into the passenger seat beside him. She kissed him, briefly, like muscle memory. But there was no joy in her eyes, no warmth in her voice. Instead, she sighed, her shoulders heavy, and told him she needed to say something before the reception. She didn't want the day to be ruined, she said, not for her sister, and not for him. Nathan listened, confused, as she explained that 4 years ago she had a fling with the best man. Her words were measured, almost detached. She told him it had meant nothing. Just a mistake, a blip in time. She said she only brought it up now because she was worried someone might mention it, and she didn't want him caught off guard. "You know how jealous you can be," she added, with a soft laugh that didn't reach her eyes. He didn't speak at first. He just nodded. He said he appreciated her telling him that it wasn't a big deal, trying to convince himself in the same breath that it wasn't. She went back inside. He went off to grab lunch and clear his head. But as he sat alone, staring at his phone without reading a word, it hit him. They'd been together 5 years. This 4 years ago affair? That wasn't before him. That was during. He ran the math again. They'd been exclusive. He remembered a stretch of their second year together when things felt off, when she was distant, when she went on a couple of weekend trips with co-workers and came back quieter than usual. Still, he told himself, there was a wedding to get through. So he buttoned his shirt, straightened his tie, and went. The ceremony was beautiful, painfully beautiful. He sat in the 3rd row, trying not to look at her too long. After the vows, the wedding party lined up for greetings. Marissa stood near the end with someone Nathan didn't recognize. But the best man, him, was there too. Nathan shook hands, smiled, pretended. Later at the reception, she finally sat beside him, but it wasn't long before she told him she'd be dancing with the groomsmen. He blinked. Why? She wasn't paired with any of them. She explained that the maid of honor was married to her original partner, and they wanted to share a dance. Nathan swallowed his frustration. He kept it in. He didn't drink, thank God for that, because he knew too well the kind of man he became when alcohol mixed with anger. And then came the dance. The best man crossed the floor and held out his hand. Marissa didn't hesitate. She smiled, genuinely this time, and took it. Nathan looked away, focused on anything else, everything else. When she returned, she brought him with her. "I want you to meet Joel," she said, laughing. Nathan's handshake was cold, his smile thin. Joel didn't seem to notice. He sat beside them, laughing and joking like they were college friends reuniting after years apart. Nathan sat there, his insides twisting, every word a hammer to his chest. He wanted to scream, he wanted to run, but instead he sat quietly, shrinking into the background of a life that was no longer quite his. Nathan sat there, quiet and burning inside, as Marissa and Joel laughed like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong between them. They reminisced about college classes and camping trips, traded stories about people Nathan had never met, people who belonged to a version of her life he never knew existed. The more they talked, the more invisible he felt. Eventually, he couldn't bear it anymore and excused himself to the restroom. He stood in front of the mirror, trying to collect himself, breathing in deep, steadying his hands. When he returned, Joel was gone. Marissa was alone again at the table, sipping a drink. As soon as he sat down, she looked at him, eyes narrowed, voice low, and told him she thought he was being rude. It hit him like a slap. That was the last thing he wanted to hear in that moment. He told her calmly that this wasn't the time or place to talk about any of it. But yes, they would talk. Just not here, not like this. Marissa crossed her arms and said she needed to change clothes. Then she added that once she returned, she'd tell her sister they were leaving because Nathan had ruined her day. But of course, she added, she didn't want him to ruin her sister's day as well. Nathan swallowed the lump in his throat and told her he had no intention of making a scene or being a problem. He didn't want to cause drama. He just wanted to stay. She walked off, and he sat alone. When she returned, she was flustered and irritated. Nathan hadn't said a word to her, hadn't even reacted beyond offering Joel a handshake. But he must have looked miserable, because that's what she latched onto. She insisted again that they leave. Nathan said that if she truly wanted to go, they could. Or if she preferred, he could leave on his own. He'd driven separately. She paused and said maybe they should stay, but then shifted again, snapping that if he couldn't act any better, then maybe he should leave. He asked how exactly he was acting. Her response made his stomach drop. She said it was obvious he was behaving like a silverback gorilla, like he wanted to start a fight. He couldn't tell if he should laugh or feel humiliated. He walked away instead. Back inside, he found her brother and made small talk for a bit, trying to pretend like his mind wasn't unraveling. Eventually, he drifted back to the table, where her grandmother sat alone, offering him the only gentle conversation of the night. They ended up leaving at the same time. Nathan drove a little faster than usual, getting home just before Marissa. He was already on the couch when she came through the front door. No hesitation this time. He didn't dance around it. He asked her to repeat what she had told him earlier. She did. Word for word. Calm. Practiced. He stared at her for a long moment and asked again if she was sure about the time. She nodded. But then he reminded her they had been together 5 years, which meant this fling of hers had happened a year and some into their relationship. Her expression didn't change. She just said, quietly, "I know." That broke something in him. He asked her to explain. She said it wasn't emotional. They had worked together. Things had been rocky between her and Nathan back then, she claimed. She never intended to leave him. It was just fun, a distraction for a few weekends, nothing more. She added that maybe she shouldn't have told him at all, but she hadn't wanted him to be blindsided. He didn't take it the way she expected. There was no understanding, no forgiveness. He exploded. He said she cheated, period, that it mattered, that it wasn't ancient history, no matter what ring she had on her finger now. What made it worse was the way she looked at him, like he was being irrational. She told him he was acting like a child, that he was overreacting, that it was in the past and had no bearing on their marriage now. That enraged him more than anything. Her condescension, her total lack of remorse. He told her he needed space, needed time to think. She dismissed it, said there was nothing to think about. They loved each other. That should be enough. That was 2 weeks ago, and Nathan still felt like he was drowning in it. Marissa had tried to talk to him since, had tried to be sweet, to draw him back in, but something inside had shifted. He didn't see her the same way anymore. Part of him whispered that maybe this was foolish, that it happened years ago, and they were married now, that everything had been fine until this resurfaced. But then came the quieter voice, the deeper one, the one that said, "She cheated on you. She smiled in another man's arms while you were breaking inside. And she made you feel like the problem." That voice never left him. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do with that, or with her. All he knew was that the woman he once saw as home now felt like a stranger. And no matter how much she insisted otherwise, it already felt like something between them had quietly, painfully ended. Nathan couldn't stop thinking about how, in all of this, he never once heard Marissa say, "I'm sorry." Not when she told him, not when he confronted her again, not when she watched him unravel. Instead, she called him childish, dismissed his hurt, made him feel like his reaction was the problem, not the betrayal itself. That part stuck in his chest like glass. Still, Nathan had been flooded with messages after his first post, more than 40 people asking for an update, checking in. So here he was again, not because he had some triumphant conclusion to share, but because the truth was messier than that. He wasn't healed, he wasn't over it, and he hadn't kicked anyone out. Not yet. There was one thing he needed to clear up, though, because it had nagged at him: the best man dance. Some people thought Marissa had arranged to dance with Joel, that she'd manipulated things to make it happen. But Nathan knew for certain that wasn't true, at least not the logistics. The maid of honor, not Marissa, was married to the groomsman originally paired with her. So Marissa swapped partners for the sake of letting the married couple share a dance. That was legitimate. Still, that didn't mean she hadn't wanted that dance, or that it didn't gut him to watch it. He wished he could come here and say he found his backbone, stood tall, and walked away from it all. But that wasn't what happened. He was stuck in a place he hadn't expected: limbo. Last week he'd been furious, raging, ready to run. But somewhere between then and now, the anger gave way to a deeper sadness, one that clung to his ribs like wet fabric. Because the truth was, he still loved her. That's what made it all so much worse. He loved Marissa. Still. Even now. That love was the thing tearing him apart. Something shifted a few days ago. Marissa finally realized Nathan wasn't just going to sweep this under the rug. That realization cracked something open in her. She became frightened, then panicked, then completely unraveled. Nathan remembered what someone in the comments had warned him about, how she might use tears as manipulation. And at first, he braced himself for that. But this didn't look like acting. It looked like collapse. Marissa had a full-blown panic attack, chest tight, breathing shallow, shaking all over. Nathan had no choice but to take her to the ER. She spent the night in the hospital, trembling and barely speaking. They put her on anti-anxiety medication and scheduled follow-ups. It was real, terrifyingly real. And that brought her family into the fold. After she was discharged, her parents and sister came home with them. Nathan didn't fight it. He had no interest in sitting across from her dad and making small talk, so when Marissa said she wanted to stay with her mom for a bit, Nathan told her he needed to wrap up some work and would come back later. 2 hours passed. Then came a text. "Please come home. I need you. I really need you." He finished what he could and drove back, stomach twisting. But when he pulled up to their house, it wasn't Marissa who greeted him. It was her father. Nathan's pulse surged. He half expected a confrontation, some parental scolding about hurting his daughter. But Marissa's dad surprised him. They sat on the porch together. Nathan steeled himself. Then her father spoke. He said Marissa had told him everything. And then, to Nathan's shock, he apologized. Said he felt like he'd failed as a parent. That this before marriage doesn't count mentality, that came from her mother. That years ago, he'd told his wife that kind of thinking would plant rotten roots, but she brushed it off. He said he wasn't defending Marissa's choices, he just wanted Nathan to understand that she truly believed what she was saying. That in her eyes, marriage was a clean slate, and anything before that didn't matter. It was a romanticized, unrealistic view of commitment, he admitted, a fairy tale sold to her by her mother, and now it was blowing up in everyone's face. Nathan sat there stunned. He never expected this man to say anything like that. They'd never been especially close, but now here he was, trying to bridge something between them. Before leaving, he reached out and shook Nathan's hand, told him whatever decision he made, he still thought very highly of him. For a brief, flickering moment, Nathan felt a little less alone. He stepped back inside, unsure of what to expect. And there was Marissa, curled up on the couch, head in her mother's lap, her entire body shaking with sobs. She looked so small, so broken. Her mom gently rubbed her back. Her dad stepped around them and quietly left, closing the door behind him. Her mother stood and embraced Nathan tightly. She whispered, "I'm so sorry, honey. I hope you two can find your way through this." And then she followed her husband out. Now it was just the two of them, Nathan and Marissa, husband and sorrow. She looked up at him, face blotchy, eyes red-rimmed and pleading. And Nathan didn't know what he was supposed to feel anymore. By the time Nathan got back, the house was quiet, except for the muffled sound of Marissa's sobs. She was curled on the couch, head buried in her mother's lap, her body trembling with every breath. Her mom looked up and rose as Nathan stepped into the living room. She didn't say much, just pulled him into a hug, whispered that she was sorry, that she still loved him, that she was praying for both of them to find a way through this. Then she and Marissa's father slipped out the door, leaving behind the stillness and the damage. Nathan stood there for a moment, watching Marissa. She hadn't moved, except to pull a blanket tighter around herself. Her eyes met his, red-rimmed and wet, and something inside him cracked. He knew what he was about to do would make some people shake their heads, but it didn't matter. He walked over to her and sat down. Then, slowly, they embraced. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and she held him as though he was the only solid thing left in a world that had tilted sideways. She whispered, "I'm sorry," over and over, voice breaking, breath catching. Nathan knew it was weak. He knew he shouldn't let himself be drawn back in so easily. But before all of this, before the betrayal, the tears, the confrontation, he had loved her with everything he had, and some stubborn part of him still didn't want to see her like that. No matter what she had done, seeing her broken like this hurt more than anger ever could. Maybe she was acting, maybe she had perfected this performance, but deep down, he didn't believe that, not this time. She looked genuinely wrecked. Once her sobbing slowed, he asked her what she had needed to talk about, why she had begged him to come home. She said she wanted everything out in the open, all of it, so that there was no more doubt, no more suspicion, no more lies by omission. She said he could ask anything. Nathan hadn't come prepared with questions. He wished he had. But the ones buried in his mind surfaced fast. And she didn't hold back. Brutal honesty, she promised. The first question, When exactly did this happen? She remembered the dates, didn't hesitate. Nathan hadn't told her about his fear, his worry that she might have cheated while they were engaged. And to his surprise, she hadn't. It had happened before the proposal. That shouldn't have felt like relief, but it did. A sick, bitter relief, but relief all the same. Then he asked the next question, one that gnawed at him. How many times? She paused, then gave him the number, not of dates, but of instances. And not vaguely. She described it, explained it. Not to be cruel, not to twist the knife, but because she thought that's what he wanted, needed to hear. He didn't. Hearing it only made it worse. The words echoed in his head, alongside the images he'd already imagined 100 times. It hadn't happened often, just over 3 separate days, she said, but several times each day. And then came the question he could barely ask. Why? Why him? Why not leave? Why wasn't Nathan enough? That's when it all hit him. The memories of her and Joel at the wedding, laughing together, the comfort between them, the casual way she had touched him, smiled at him. Then this, knowing how often, where, when, it all poured over him like ice water. He cried, not loud, but deeply, the kind of crying that rattles the ribs and leaves your throat raw. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Marissa held him. She tried to talk, to explain, but her words faded into the buzz of pain that was already deafening. He barely registered what she said. Nothing could uncut what had already been sliced open. When he gathered himself again, his voice was quiet but full of ache. He told her that the cheating, awful as it was, wasn't the only thing that destroyed him. It was how she reacted when he found out. The callous dismissal, the superiority, the way she called him immature, like his pain was something to mock. She looked down, ashamed, and finally, she apologized. She said she hadn't meant to hurt him more, that she genuinely believed at the time that because they were married now, it wouldn't matter, that it shouldn't matter. Nathan clenched his jaw. That excuse made his blood boil all over again. He was about to speak when she cut in, saying she now saw how wrong that mindset was. After speaking with her parents, she understood. Cheating was cheating, no matter when it happened. She said their happiness since marriage should still mean something. Nathan shook his head. It feels like that happiness was built on a lie, he said. That led to another breakdown. She nearly spiraled into another panic attack, and Nathan found himself holding a paper sack to her face, helping her breathe, watching the color return to her cheeks. That night, they didn't fight anymore. They didn't talk much either, just existed beside each other, exhausted. Sunday morning came, and the conversation picked up again, but Nathan felt different. Numb, maybe, or just hollowed out. He told her what had been on his mind since the reception. That introducing him to Joel, that was cruel. Dancing with him, worse. Only confessing because she feared being exposed, that was something else entirely. He demanded to know who else knew. Joel obviously did. His best friend, too, and now his brother-in-law. Marissa's sister had figured it out. And Marissa admitted she was terrified her sister would be the one to tell him. Nathan sat there stunned. There was no safe place left in this story, not even his own family now. When Nathan asked Marissa how often she saw Joel, her voice barely rose above a whisper. She told him that the wedding had been the first time in 3 years. Something about the way she said it made Nathan's stomach churn. Then, without meaning to, he snapped. He asked, no, demanded, if she'd slept with Joel again in the weeks leading up to the wedding. The question tore out of him like glass. Her reaction? Defensive, dismissive. She rolled her eyes, arms crossed, and scoffed at the accusation, saying she would never cheat on him because she was married. That broke him. Nathan stormed out of the house, needing air, space, anything to stop himself from screaming. He paced the street in front of their home, under the faded porch lights and the chilled Montana dusk, wondering if maybe Marissa was living in a completely different version of reality, one where marriage was some kind of moral immunity, a place where the consequences of past choices didn't follow you into the present. He finally cooled down enough to go back inside. When he walked in, she was quiet, exhausted. She looked at him with glassy eyes and asked softly what she could do, what she should do to help them move past this. It wasn't much, but it was the first time she'd asked. The first time she wasn't defending or dismissing or minimizing. Nathan didn't have an answer. He told her honestly that he didn't know, that maybe there was nothing either of them could do, that maybe he'd never get over it. And still, she said she would do anything to keep their life intact. Not because she didn't want to be alone, she insisted, but because she hated seeing him hurt. She said she hoped that, with time, he could judge her based on who she was now, not the person she had been before. She made a point of saying she had been entirely faithful since their wedding, that she had never and would never break her vows. It was meant to be reassuring, but Nathan found himself answering with a sarcastic, "Thank you," which, he admitted later, wasn't his finest moment. The air between them felt heavy. He asked her for space, a moratorium on emotional conversations until at least Wednesday. He had 2 major work projects to finish, and the emotional weight of it all was leaving him utterly drained. He didn't know what he wanted. Some days he felt a wildfire of rage, ready to throw everything out. Other days, the grief sat so deep he found himself longing just to go back to how things were, to pretend this never happened. He knew this wasn't what anyone rooting for a clean answer wanted to hear. But it was his reality, and it was painful. In a quiet moment, Nathan updated the people who had been reaching out since he'd shared his story. He'd received over 400 private messages. Some offered comfort, others advice. A few shared their own heartbreak. He tried to read them all, but replying was impossible. It would take weeks. He thanked everyone who wrote to him. To those who felt too afraid to share their thoughts publicly for fear of being attacked, he said he understood. There had been thoughtful messages on both sides, some that saw hope, others that urged him to walk away. But he didn't believe in demonizing people just because their views differed. Everyone was speaking from pain. That much he could see. So, for the many who'd asked how he was doing, here was the update. The night after he asked for space, Marissa respected his request. But Nathan could tell she was on edge. Her nerves were frayed, her emotions close to the surface. Even with her anxiety medication, she struggled to hold herself together. She told him later that not being held, feeling no warmth or affection from him, was torture. Then came what his father used to call a come-to-Jesus conversation. That night, Nathan came home from work with takeout, hoping to eliminate any distractions. They sat down at 6 in the evening and didn't stop talking until nearly 2 in the morning. Everything came out. All the issues, all the wounds, and whether or not either of them was willing to do the work to even try to move forward. By the end of it, Nathan made a decision. He was moving in with his brother for a while. It wasn't to punish her, and it wasn't a breakup. It was a space he needed, not just physically, but emotionally. Marissa, understandably, was crushed. But he made it clear, he would still be communicating. He wasn't walking out of the marriage. Not yet. So, why the move? Because after that long conversation, Nathan was left with one unbearable truth. If he had known, if she had told him back then, when it happened, he would have left, without hesitation. And that meant the life they built afterward, no matter how happy it seemed, was missing something essential: his consent to continue. She had taken away his choice. And though he believed she hadn't meant to deceive him once they were married, it didn't change the fact that she had. He still wanted to try. He still loved her. But he couldn't stay in that house, in that shared bed, and pretend the foundation hadn't been cracked. He needed time to figure out if it could ever be rebuilt. Nathan didn't know how this chapter would end. All he knew was that he wasn't ready to give up, but he also wasn't willing to lie to himself anymore. Nathan sat on the edge of his brother's guest bed, staring down at his hands, trying to make sense of everything that had been said the night before. The conversation had left them both wrung out, like fabric twisted too tightly. It wasn't that anything had been solved, but at least the air between them wasn't filled with silence anymore. There were words now, even if they were hard to swallow. He kept coming back to the same thought: their life together, the last few years of shared memories, laughter, quiet moments, had been built on a foundation that wasn't entirely honest. She hadn't told him the truth when it mattered most, and that changed things. Still, part of him wondered, even if the foundation was cracked, was it possible to rebuild? Sometimes, Nathan thought, a house could be saved by shoring up the walls. Other times, you had to knock everything down and start again. That's what he was trying to do: shake things up, shake them both awake. Maybe it was naive. Maybe it was pointless. But after everything, he still wanted to try. Their marriage up until that discovery had felt close to perfect, at least to him. Not without flaws, of course, but grounded in love. That's what made all of this feel so cruel. The betrayal had opened a hole in the center of their life. And what stung just as much as the cheating itself was how carelessly she'd treated his pain. In their long talk, Nathan told Marissa that he still considered it cheating. That hadn't changed. And to her credit, she no longer tried to argue that it wasn't. She admitted she'd been wrong. But he also laid bare something else: her total lack of regard for his feelings when he found out. The way she'd laughed it off, called him childish, tried to bulldoze his hurt under some false logic about marriage overriding history. That was something he couldn't ignore. To his surprise, she apologized. She said she had convinced herself that because they were married now, the past shouldn't matter. That his reaction had seemed unreasonable in that distorted context. But after talking with her parents, and after seeing just how shattered he really was, she understood now. Cheating was cheating, and what hurt even more was not being seen when he was in pain. He told her again how humiliating it was to be introduced to Joel like they were old pals. To be asked to shake his hand while wondering if the man in front of him had seen the parts of her he once believed were sacred to just them. That moment had burned a scar into him, one that would take time to fade, if it ever did. Marissa didn't defend herself. She apologized again, and this time it sounded like she meant it. She explained that, in her mind, she thought being casual around Joel would ease Nathan's suspicions. That if she acted too carefully, it would have looked worse. But she realized now how wrong she had been. Even her sister had told her afterward that it had been a terrible decision. That seeing Nathan's face when they danced together had been painful to witness. Marissa admitted that hearing that from her own sister cut her deeply. Still, when Nathan pressed further about why she hadn't seemed remorseful for the affair itself, she paused. She told him she was sorry now, that at the time she had made a terrible mistake, acted selfishly, and hadn't fully grasped the consequences. She said if she could undo it, she would. But what haunted Nathan most was this: it seemed like she wasn't sorry until he reacted. That if he'd shrugged it off, Maybe she never would have reflected on it at all. He told her that, and to her credit, she didn't deny it. She admitted that after the wedding, when she realized Nathan wouldn't just let it go, she started to understand how deeply she had hurt him. Her first reaction had been anger that she was upset. But over the days that followed, the reality set in. And with it, panic. No one in her family had ever gotten divorced. Not one. The idea that she might be the first, the failure, had consumed her. It was part of what sent her spiraling into that hospital stay. In the weeks since, she'd talked more with her family. She was beginning to unravel the unhealthy beliefs she'd carried about marriage, that the ceremony erased the past, that love was a guarantee. She told Nathan she genuinely regretted bringing Joel around him, that, in hindsight, it had been thoughtless and cruel. But Nathan noticed something else, too. Even now, even with all this said, she never once expressed guilt over the affair itself. Regret, yes, but not guilt, not shame, not the kind of sorrow he needed to hear. He wanted people to know that. This wasn't some sterile exchange. There had been tears, real ones. There were moments where Marissa looked absolutely gutted. She cursed, she begged. And by the end of the 8-hour conversation, she could barely keep her eyes open from emotional exhaustion. Nathan made his terms clear. If they were going to move forward, it was entirely up to her to show that she wanted it. She said she did, repeatedly, desperately. But there were rules now. Joel was to be out of her life permanently. No contact. That was non-negotiable. They would go to couples therapy. And while Nathan was living with his brother, they would remain legally married. But neither of them would see other people. No excuses, no loopholes. If they were going to rebuild, they needed to do it from the ground up. Together. Or not at all. There would be no more gray areas. Nathan made that clear. If either of them used this time apart as an excuse to see someone else, it was over. No second chances, no justifications. It would be the final betrayal, and Nathan would walk away without looking back. That was his line in the sand. He told Marissa this wasn't a free pass. They were still married, still tethered to the vows they made. And though those vows now felt fragile, weathered by everything they had endured, he wasn't ready to let go of them yet, not entirely. They were trying to start over, in their own broken, backwards way. But Nathan knew something had changed in him. Even if he didn't want it to, it had. He couldn't look at her the same way he used to. The image of her with someone else, choosing someone else, was carved into his mind like initials in stone. That choice haunted everything now. Still, he wasn't ready to throw away the life they had built. Not if there was still something left to save. So here they were, standing on opposite sides of a line, trying to decide whether to reach for each other again or walk away for good. He knew many wouldn't understand his choice. Maybe they didn't need to. But at the end of the day, Nathan had to do what gave him the best chance at healing. His head told him to stay guarded, to be cautious. But his heart, damn his heart, was still tangled in love for her. They had a date planned for Friday, something simple, dinner, a walk. Marissa had lit up when he agreed to it, like it was the first spark of hope in a long winter. Nathan didn't know how long he'd stay at his brother. Maybe he wouldn't even make it past Friday. But right now, having control over something, anything, was better than the helplessness he'd been drowning in. That night, they held each other again. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't romantic. It was just quiet, human. She cried into his shirt. He stared past her, at the ceiling. They slept side by side like two people who didn't know how to let go, even when it hurt to hold on. Nathan didn't want a broken woman, and in many ways, Marissa was broken. But he had once believed she would be his partner for life. He still wanted that. But now he needed her to understand that partnership went both ways, that his feelings mattered just as much as hers, that love without respect was just a shadow of what it was supposed to be. He thought again about his new brother-in-law, Joel. He'd only met him a handful of times. Joel seemed like a perfectly decent guy, polite, even friendly. But by the end of all this, it was obvious Joel had known exactly what had happened. He hadn't warned Nathan, hadn't said a word, just smiled and shook his hand like nothing. Nathan made a choice. For the sake of peace, he wouldn't make a scene. Holidays were going to be hard enough without dragging the entire family into a war. But there were terms. Joel was never to mention what had happened. Not to Nathan and not around him, not once. If he did, that would be the end of any attempt at civility. He could live with silence. He couldn't live with reminders. When Nathan posted another update, he was almost overwhelmed by the instant response. Dozens of messages, dozens more comments. It always struck him how many people were afraid to voice their true opinions out loud, worried they'd be attacked for them. He wished that wasn't the case. There was enough pain in these stories without adding more through judgment. Then there was one last thing, something Nathan realized he hadn't really addressed before, and it needed to be said. Marissa had known what she was doing was wrong. She never tried to claim otherwise. But what stunned Nathan most was the realization that she had always thought marriage meant the finish line, that once they were married, the slate was wiped clean. She had hidden it because she knew that if Nathan had found out before the wedding, he would have walked away. And here was the most crushing part. She was shocked that he still considered it cheating, that it still mattered to him, that finding out now, after vows had been exchanged, was still enough to break him. To her, the cheating didn't count because it happened before their wedding, as though the ceremony itself sanctified the years before it, as though pain had an expiration date. Nathan found that idea absurd, cruel even. And yet, it was real. That was the belief she'd been raised with. She had convinced herself that marriage was some holy wall separating past from present, that once they crossed it, everything behind them no longer mattered. Marissa, for all her mistakes, was still deeply religious. Nathan was not, and that created a tension neither of them fully knew how to navigate. He couldn't understand how someone who claimed to believe in commitment could so easily compartmentalize betrayal. But that's where they were now. The final update, for now, was this. Nathan had been living with his brother for over a month. And strangely, through the pain, that experience had brought something good. It had brought them closer. His brother had bent over backwards to support him. They stayed up late talking, played old video games, cooked each other meals like they were kids again. They weren't just siblings anymore. They were allies. And now came the hardest part. Nathan had gone to a lawyer, not because he wanted to end things, but because he needed a plan, just in case. The lawyer drafted divorce papers, 3 copies. One stayed in the office, one went to Nathan, and one he handed to Marissa, in person, with shaking hands and a heavy heart. Nathan thought he was doing the right thing when he handed Marissa the divorce papers, his version of a safeguard, a just-in-case gesture. His intention wasn't to end things. He just wanted to show her how serious he was. But timing is everything, and in this case, his timing shattered her. Marissa had been trying, really trying. Their recent dates had gone surprisingly well, moments where laughter came easier, where the tension in the air seemed to lift, even just a little. But then he handed her that envelope. She had been smiling when she opened the door, hopeful. That look disappeared the second she saw what was inside. The anxiety attack that followed was the worst yet. Her breathing grew shallow, her hands trembled violently. The medication didn't help, so they rushed to the ER again. A shot calmed her, and they quietly agreed, no more family involvement this time. Nathan stayed with her for 2 days afterward, watching over her, making sure she ate, that she rested. But the damage was done. In counseling, he was honest. He admitted it was a mistake, that giving her those papers made him look manipulative, and, in truth, he had been. He ripped up his copy and hers right in front of her. She doesn't know there's a third one with the lawyer. He's planning to have it destroyed too. That moment, her face when she opened the envelope, is burned into his memory. He never wants to see that expression again. A mix of betrayal and terror. She had been happy to see him that day, and he ruined it. Still, beyond that misstep, something had shifted. Progress was real, if fragile. He was moving back home that weekend. His brother had been incredible, giving him space and comfort when he needed it most. But Nathan missed home, missed her. He knew he'd cramped his brother's life enough. The Xbox nights were fun, but they weren't a life. Marissa had done everything he asked. She had endured emotional hell. She understood now, truly, how serious it all was. Nathan believed that. He didn't think she was pretending anymore. She'd made a horrible, selfish decision years ago. But since then, she'd been a near-perfect wife. He still loved her. Some wouldn't understand that. Some would call him weak, a fool. He didn't care. They weren't the ones waking up to the silence, to the space where love used to live. He knew what he needed: healing, time, patience. They weren't fixed, not even close, but they were trying, and that had to count for something. Stories like Nathan and Marissa's are painful because they reflect a reality many couples quietly endure. When trust is broken, love alone doesn't glue the pieces back. It takes work, and even then, the scars may remain. If you've been betrayed, your feelings are valid. Don't let anyone shame you for needing time, distance, or boundaries. Healing isn't linear. You may waver between anger and longing, between wanting to stay and needing to leave. That's okay. For those trying to repair things, honesty must be mutual. Apologies must be real. And both partners have to be willing to confront their ugliest truths without defensiveness. Therapy helps. Boundaries help. So does patience, with yourself and each other. But also know this: protecting your mental and emotional health isn't selfish, it's survival. Whether you choose to rebuild or walk away, your peace matters. Listen to it. And for anyone watching from the outside, be kind. Not every wound bleeds where we can see it.